Hello students. Today we are going to discuss about interview skills. Part 2. This will talk about the situations which might come across as and when you are facing an interview. There are different types of interviews. Earlier in the part 1 we discussed about the preparation part, how you need to prepare for an interview. What are the things that you should keep in mind before you go for an interview? But today we will discuss about the different kinds of interviews, different situations where you will be placed before different kinds of people and different kinds of expectations. How are you going to deal with that? So it is about the situations. Part 2. Before we proceed in detail, I would just like to give you a brief idea as to there are different kinds of interviews that is being conducted across the world. Now, for different purpose, there are different kinds of interviews which are being held. We should have a clear idea about the different types of interviews so that we know in what way we have to conduct ourselves in a particular interview, particular given situation. We'll quickly have a look at the types of interviews. It's a screening interview, selection interview. We will discuss about each one of them. Group interview, stress interview, walk-in interview. You have the virtual interview, campus interview. In campus interview, you have again two different kinds, on campus and off campus interviews. You have panel interviews, you have telephonic interviews, behavioral interview or case interviews. Now these are the different kinds of interviews that we discussed. We haven't discussed yet. We will discuss about these different types of interviews. Shall we begin with the first one, screening. Now what do you mean by screening? Before you are being called for an interview, the organization who has received your biodata, your resume, your application would definitely go through the resume and would like to know more about you while going through the resume before they finalize the candidates who would actually come for the interview. So the first interview that we call is screening. It can be called as a first interview. Why? Because even before you have gone, there are certain activities happening which is trying to evaluate you. And how is it? Either it could be someone from the HR department of the organization who might call you, maybe through a telephone. He or she might try and verify the facts before you are even called for an interview. So verification of information, because they've received your application on the basis of the resume that you have provided, they might further investigate and try to cross-check certain details, would need to verify the facts that you have mentioned in your resume, whether they are real or whether they are genuine or not. So that's how the screening takes place. Now we come to the next part, because screening is a very there's a most primary part before you are called for an interview. Now the selection interview, this is when certain shortlisted candidates are already invited for the interview. Now you will be selected based on the personality. So therefore a personality test would be conducted, not in a very organized manner. You will never know that it's a personality test, but during the interview, the selection interview, it is your personality that will be assessed, because your resume does not actually reveal the true essence of your personality, which can be shown or depicted only when they meet you. Only when you put yourself before them would they know what kind of a person you are, what are the personality traits that you possess. We can have a look at the next point, the ability to interact. You have written in your resume that you are too good in communication, you are fluent with the English language, and a lot of good aspects of your ability to communicate effectively, right? These things have been highlighted in your application or your resume. Now, they would want to cross check it, they would want to know it. So it's during the selection interview where they will definitely put you to test in order to know whether you really possess the ability to interact or not. So there will be a lot of questions being asked, and these exchange of questions and the answers that you provide will definitely ensure them that you are a good and an effective communicator. Not only that you are a good communicator, but you're a good listener as well, because while you interact, when they ask you questions, you need to listen to those questions carefully. Only then and then you will be able to answer them. In a selection interview, it's very clear that you are not the only person who has been called for an interview. There are more people on the panel. It's not one person who will interview you, nor are you the only person who would be interviewed. So there is more than one person. There are more than one person who will be interviewing you, and there would be different people with whom you will have interviews, right, at different levels also. Now we look at the next category, which we call as the group interview. Now this is another type of an interview where not very few selected candidates are called. There will be several candidates who have been invited, so nobody has any idea as to who is going to be selected for that job, So there are a lot of candidates, and now you have to showcase your skills here, because it's a highly competitive world, and when there are more candidates who have been invited, it is going to be a cutthroat competition, and therefore you have to perform extremely well in such interviews. You have to be more cautious, you have to be more careful, because the group consists of people from diverse background, from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and you would be competing with those people. So what is it that they generally do in a group interview? There are a lot of candidates who have appeared for this, right? But they would like to test you as a candidate, whether you are a good team player or not, whether you are good and fit for the job or not. So you have to act very naturally, or will be put in jobs which are not appropriate. Because if you are a bit reserved, and if you do not talk freely, you are not able to express yourself in a very effective manner, if you do not generate the kind of natural behavior, then it is quite possible that they might put you in very inappropriate jobs or odd jobs, which is not what you are looking for. So especially with group interviews, you have to be very, very careful. The other situation that can arise is, it's another type where your ability to face different stressful situations will be taken care of. This we call it as stress interview, because not all fingers are equal, not every individual is the same, right? So therefore what they're looking for is a person who can handle a lot of stress. Therefore this stress interview is very, very important for such jobs where a lot of stress is involved in the nature of the job itself. So this stress interview will actually try and weed out those who cannot handle stress, who cannot handle adversity. So you need to show that you are adept at handling stress, you are good at it, and you should confidently present yourself that under any kind of stressful situation, your performance will never be compromised. You will perform to the best of your ability even under stressful conditions or situations. This is what you need to specifically highlight, and this can be done only in a stress interview. So what generally happens in a stress interview, this also you need to understand. Like, look at the next point on the slide. It talks about quick questions and no time. So there will be a volley of questions thrown before you. So before one interviewer asks, there will be a lot of people sitting on the interview panel who would one after the other start throwing questions at you, and you would be given no time to answer. Even before you think and begin to answer, the other person would have already asked the next question. So they will ensure that you are put in a very stressful situation, and this is what they're going to observe. They will observe your body language, whether you're getting nervous, you're getting stressed. When these volley of questions are thrown at you, how is it that you react to these questions, and how do you respond to these questions? These are few things that they intend to assess you. These are the things on the basis of which they are going to assess you or evaluate you. So please keep yourself calm and composed under these conditions. You have to respond it in a very, very positive manner, but at the same time you should be very alert, because before you have finished answering the question, there would be the next question which would be put before you. Now the interviewer's response with silence. So you actually do not know, there is no response that comes which tells you that whether you were right or wrong, right? Whether your answers were satisfactory or not. So you get no response from the interviewer, so therefore you will be more stressed whether the interview is going in the right direction or not, whether you're going to be selected or not, whether you're going to handle the next question, because you are already answering this and you already know that the next question is going to be put before you. Offbeat questions to determine how the candidate answers. There are a lot of questions which probably you are not prepared. We discussed in the part 1 of interview skills, where when we are supposed to prepare certain questions, we already know these are the kinds of questions that the interviewer might ask. But you will be taken to surprise when offbeat questions will be put before you. You had never expected a question of this kind, and you were not prepared for such a question. And under these circumstances, under these conditions, under this situation, how do you handle yourself? You have to be very calm and composed. You have to handle this particular situation without any pressure, without any stress. And therefore, that stress interview is very, very important. We come to the next type of interview, which talks about walk-in interview. Now, what do you do in a walk-in interview? There are a lot of companies, they just advertise and invite candidates for a walk-in interview where anybody can come in with their resume and get themselves interviewed. And if you prove to be good, if you prove to satisfy their needs, then they would definitely hire you for that job. Now, this is a walk-in interview. So the company doesn't know how many candidates are going to come, nor do you have any idea as to how many candidates are expected for these many number of jobs, maybe vacancies that are there. So no need to pre-schedule an appointment in these cases. Generally, when you go for an interview, you have a schedule before you. This is the time of the interview, and this is the day, and this is the venue, right? But here you have no such schedule of time. There's no need, and therefore you just walk in at your convenience. If you're working elsewhere, the time is so flexible that at your convenience you can go and meet the head of the organization who is conducting the interview, and just give your interview. Now this is a walk-in interview. Here comparatively there is less stress because it's not a pre-scheduled kind of an appointment. Therefore there would not be many candidates. So when you enter the premise where the interview is going to be held, you have no idea, you don't see any other candidates around, so you are comparatively relaxed under the impression that there are no candidates other than you. So probably these kind of interviews give you a lot of this kind of interview rather gives you a lot of confidence. While you carry your documents and be organized with it. You carry your documents and be organized with it, because you had not carry your documents and be organized with it. See, it's a walk-in interview. You have not sent your documents earlier. You have not sent your resume to them, so they do not possess them. So when you present that before them, you should be very, very organized with it, because they're going to see it for the very first time. Therefore you have to present it in a very organized fashion. This kind of interview, it is very convenient with an existing job that you have, for the simple reason that as I told you earlier, it's very flexible. At your convenience, at your time, you can go and appear for the interview. So walk-in interviews are comparatively more flexible, more adaptive, in a sense that you are comfortable, because there is not too much of a crowd when you go for such an interview. We come to the next kind of interview, the next type of interview, that is the virtual interview. The virtual word is very, very commonly discussed these days, because we have virtual conferences, we have virtual classrooms where you do not meet the interviewee and the interviewer do not meet each other face to face. So the simulated conversation between both parties is through a video clip, as you can see on the monitor. The first point, which says the conversation takes place between two people, they are facing each other, but it's through a video clip. So they're not sitting exactly like in normal interviews where you sit face to face with your interviewer. So that is a virtual kind of interview. These kinds of interviews are very, very common. There are a lot of virtual interviews taking place, mostly in the corporate world, where they do not have fixed schedule. They might have fixed schedule, but they do not have to travel. You can sit at a comfortable position, and you can sit at home, and maybe if you have all the technological facilities available at your home, it could be even from your home. These kind of virtual interviews can be held. Now look at this next point. Candidate chooses from a set of responses. Now in virtual interviews, at times there's a possibility that the answers are provided, set of responses are already provided on the screen maybe, and you have to just select those responses. At times virtual interview is also conducted in this manner. Several questions asked and answers evaluated. So there are a lot of questions which will be asked in a virtual interview, and you will be evaluated on the basis of the answers that you provide to these questions. Process continues until a decisive conclusion about suitability of candidate is reached. So the interview process could last longer. There is no fixed schedule here as to how much would be the duration of the interview. The process of the virtual interview will continue until a decision is taken as to either the candidate is suitable for this particular job or that he is not. Right? There is a new concept with several advantages. Now this virtual kind of an interview is a new concept. Not many people have this kind of facility where they conduct virtual interviews, because as I said, technology plays a major role here. Both sides should have the facility, and only then these kind of interviews can be held. So it's a very new concept which is coming up, and which is coming up in a big way. And as I told you earlier, a lot of corporates have these kind of interviews, and there are a lot of advantages here. As I told you, you don't have to travel, and you can sit comfortably in your office or at your home, and then you can face this kind of an interview. So that is definitely, I'm sorry, we come to the next kind of interview, where we talk about panel interview. Now, what is a panel interview? The group of interviewers here now that's why we call it as a panel interview. It is very easy to face one person, but if you have many people sitting, and there are volley of questions coming up, as we already discussed about a similar kind of interview earlier, a group interview, or so group of interviewers would be testing you, would be putting you to test in this interview. Apart from that, same set of questions to draw comparisons between different candidates. So all the candidates who have come for this interview would have more or less the same set of questions which will be asked by the panelists, right? And all these different candidates would come up with different answers depending on their ability, their experience, their achievements, or the answers would be different, but the questions would be the same set of questions which will be asked. And obviously, with the same set of questions, how different people have responded, reacted to these questions, on the basis of that you will be evaluated. So there is a clear kind of what you call as a comparison between different kinds of people here. Experts from different functions. You will find that there would be a lot of experts from different functions. So each interviewer would have a different kind of question that they would put before you as an interviewee. Can evaluate a candidate collectively. So when you're putting the same set of questions to a whole lot of the candidates, so collectively you can evaluate the candidate. The candidates are evaluated in that manner. So it's like not one person will decide whether the candidate ought to be selected or not. It's a group of people, the panel members who have participated in the interview would take a decision based on the different requirements or the different functions that they all had interrogated with the interviewer. So they will definitely try to evaluate the candidate, but it would be collectively. Finally, with different panel members asking different sets of questions maybe, but finally they'll come to a conclusion on the basis of the evaluation that is being done. The candidate would be evaluated collectively by the panel members. The next point is stressful for the candidate. These kind of interviews are definitely stressful because there are a lot of panelists sitting in front of you, and one after the other they keep asking you questions. We did discuss about the stress interview, where a situation is generated where you experience stress because there are a lot of people interviewing you and they keep asking you questions one after the other, which builds stress and would definitely put you in a fix. So it is just to test your ability to handle stress, So here also you have the same kind of thing. Like you will see that it's stressful for the candidate. When there are a lot of people asking you questions and trying to test your ability, it definitely makes you feel stressed, you experience stress under such conditions. That's a very normal thing. Okay. Now, when there are a lot of questions being asked by these panelists, so there is a rapid stream of questions that is coming up, right? So one after the other, when questions are being put forth before you, you have to answer them very carefully, very diligently, very confidently. There is no particular sequence in a panel interview where who is going to ask first, and there is no sequence. Like anybody from the panel might come up with a question, and you have to answer them. So key is to balance eye contact. So eye contact, as I mentioned earlier also, it's very, very important to maintain good eye contact with the interviewer. But it is possible when you have fewer people interviewing you, 1 or 2 people interviewing you. But if you have a panel before you, there are a lot of people sitting in front of you, and you never know where the next question is coming from. So you have to keep changing you have to keep shifting your eyes from one person to the other. But when a question is being put forth, you have to maintain that. You have to keep a balance, to balance your eye contact with the interviewer, whoever is asking you the question. You have to maintain an eye contact with that person. That is a key, very important in a panel interview, where you have to maintain the balancing of the eye contact, which is very, very key, very, very important. You have to avoid ignoring any member. It's quite possible in a group of maybe 6-7 panelists who are taking you to task. You might not like a particular member. Maybe he might have earlier asked you a rude question, or you might have not felt comfortable answering his question, or probably you did not have the answer to his question. But you cannot, while you're answering any of the panelists' question, you cannot ignore any such individual among the panel. You have to ensure that you give due weightage to each and every panelist sitting in front of you. So cannot avoid or single out one member whom probably you have a dislike for, whatever be the reason, but ensure that you are polite with each one of them. You have to see that you are not ignoring any of the members of the panel, right? Now focus only on one thing. Like when one person is asking you a question, you have to keep your entire focus, your concentration on that particular, whoever has asked you the question. You have to focus on that person, because it is he who is inquisitive about knowing, collecting information on a particular topic. Now you're judged by responses. How are you judged in an interview of this kind, in a panel interview? Because everybody is observing you. The entire panel, all the panel members are observing you. They are judging your responses. They are asking you questions. They are also keeping an eye on your body language. They would also be noticing whether you are calm and composed, or whether you are very stressed when being faced by a number of panelists before you. So it's how you respond to this question. You are judged by the responses. Then the questions, how you answer these questions, you'll be judged on that basis. You will be judged by the body language that you generate. So you display the kind of body language that you display, whether you are confident, whether you are nervous, whether you are offended by some particular question or not. So all those expressions that you, facial expressions, eye contacts, the gestures that you make. So the ability to be calm and focused under all this stressful situation is something which you need to learn. So particularly in an interview of this sort, where you have a lot of panel members sitting in front of you. You should know how to handle these panelists, how to answer each and every panel member with a lot of confidence, and the answers and the responses that you give to them should be to the satisfaction of these panelists. So if you are very stressed, you will never be able to answer that. We come to the next kind of interview, which is very, very important. These kind of interviews also are quite common these days, where from telephonic interview, where somebody calls you up. You have already sent a resume to a company, and you have sent them your contact number. So they call you when they feel like, or when they think it's the right time, unless you have mentioned your the availability, when are you available. This has to be communicated to the organization or the management where you, or the office where you have applied, the company where you have applied. So adequate planning and preparation is very important here, because here you are not going to be facing an interviewer. You are going to talk to that person over the phone. So what are the things? It's only the words that you speak, the way you present your ideas in a very logical manner, which will make you which will give you a better chance to be selected. Because if you give answers in a haphazard manner, illogical manner, there is no scope of being selected, for the simple reason that you generally communicate by your telephonic conversation that you are very disorganized, you have not thought about the answers properly, and you are just giving answers in a very haphazard manner. So adequate planning and preparation is required here, because you should know what kind of questions would be asked, and you should have your resume in fact kept near you, so that you have an idea as to what you have written in your resume and what they might ask you. The next point is be available for scheduled call. Now you already know that you're not going to visit the organization, you're not going to meet the company. It is only that you are going to be called by the organization, and that time your availability should be mentioned somewhere in the resume, so that they call you at that time. But it's quite possible that when they call you, you might not be available at home, right? You might have gone elsewhere, so then you miss that chance. So be available for scheduled call. That's important. Okay, you have already specified the time, you have mentioned the time in your resume. This is the time when you will be available. So ensure that till the interview is over, keep yourself free during those hours. Okay, then you try to talk slowly. That's very important, because you have no non-verbal communication here. You will be purely judged on the basis of the verbal communication that you are going to share with them. It's through the telephonic conversation which you are going to have with them. Okay, so you have to be talking very slowly. When you talk slowly, you have to ensure that you're very audible also. You should be easily heard and understood. Unless you're clear with your speech, the other person might not be able to comprehend what you are trying to speak, and therefore it is essential that you talk very slowly. You are very audible. You should not be very loud while you're talking on the telephone. And the speech that you make, that is whatever you speak in this kind of interview, you have to be very, very clear. Thought should be put forth very clearly. You do not have a chance to discuss it later, or maybe face to face also. You are not going to meet the person, so you will be judged on the base of the tone that you use, So from the tone of the voice, the interviewer would know whether you are a very enthusiastic person, whether you're a very positive person, whether you are a very soft-spoken person, or you're very rude. All this can be judged through the tone of the voice that you generate. Okay, so the quality of the voice is very, very important here. The tone and quality, voice quality, they are of prime importance for the simple reason that you are not going to meet the person face to face. It's a telephonic interview, and this is the situation where you're put in. So you have to make best use of your tone, the tone of the voice. You have to come up with a very good, clear voice so that you convey that you are a very energetic person. You shouldn't be, your voice shouldn't appear as if you are very tired or that you lack confidence. So these things really puts off the interviewer. Therefore, you have to, with the right kind of voice modulation, you should be able to convey the message that you're a very enthusiastic, energetic, exuberant and a confident person while you are giving this kind of an interview. Okay, that's a situation which you might come across where you really do not get an opportunity to talk on a one-to-one basis. So it's a very difficult situation. But how do you handle this situation? It's here the voice is of prime importance, as I mentioned earlier. So please try to modulate your voice and use the right tone so that you can really impress the interviewer. The next point is the documents should be ready, because it should be right in front of you. All the documents that you had submitted at the company or in the organization should be ready with you. You should also have pen and paper. Wherever necessary, you please try and take notes, because there is no second chance here. So whatever information that they might want to give, might be they would want to give you the address, they would want to give some other details. So please try to keep a pen and paper at that point of time so that you can definitely take notes at that point of time. While talking on the telephone, you have to be extra cautious that you have to avoid eating and smoking. May keep a glass of water which is reachable if needed. While giving, because the duration of the interview might be a little longer, so in case if you're thirsty, you cannot get up and leave in the middle of the interview, and therefore at the most you have to keep a glass of water, pen and paper. Everything should be ready in front of you. The documents should be ready. So that's important, so that you don't have to get up from your, and you cannot rather get up from your position. But you should avoid eating and smoking. That's very, very important, because while we are talking to somebody, when you're giving an interview on a telephone, you should not eat and make that slurpy noise, which can send a very, very wrong message to the interviewer. Don't take this thing casually at all, because you might be under the impression that anyway that person is sitting some hundreds of miles away, but that doesn't matter. The voice that is clearly being transported to the interviewer has to be very clear. And if you're eating or either you're smoking and you are talking to that interviewer, definitely he will be put off by that kind of a sound, by that kind of a noise that is created. On the telephone, there is no scope for face reading or lip reading or something like that. So you have to listen very, very carefully. You have to listen carefully without interruptions. First you listen. Learn to listen, especially in any interview. I mean, listening is of prime importance. Unless and until you have heard the questions carefully, you will never be able to respond to those questions. But what I'm trying to say here is that while you are while the question is being put before you, try to listen carefully. There shouldn't be any interruptions in between. Let the other person complete the question, and you have to answer that question in brief. You cannot go on and on. Maybe you have the habit of talking on the telephone for long hours, but please don't practice that here. Be brief when you're answering the questions. Okay, we go to the next point, that is, if required, keep a watch to monitor time. This is very important, because when a question is put before you, you should have a clear idea as to how much time should I spend answering this question. It's a situation you are put in where you really do not know. You might go on and on and on about while giving answer to that particular question, but please keep a watch to monitor the time. That's very important. You know how much what duration you have been interviewed. The next point which is important is you have to use your landline. Okay, that's important. Why is it that we insist that when you are having a telephonic kind of an interview, you should use your landline? Because if you're using a mobile, and if the battery of your mobile isn't charged well, it is quite possible that there will be frequent call dropping. In order to prevent that, in order to prevent the telephonic conversation to be disconnected, you need to use the landline, because there will be a continuous flow then without any interruptions. Turn off call waiting to avoid again interruptions. Do not keep it in call waiting mode, because then it is quite possible that while you are having this interview, somebody is trying to reach you on your landline, and there would be those beeps and interruptions which can distract you. And if you get distracted, you might get perturbed, confused, you might be under immense stress, and all these things can be avoided just by ensuring that it is not put in that mode. Okay, we move to the next one. If the next point of the same telephonic interview that we are talking about, if the employer calls at inconvenient time, politely explain and request for an alternate time at employer's time. It should be at his time, the employer's time, the one who is interviewing you. You leave it to them. But then if the time that when they contacted you, when they called you, if you are not free at that point of time, please be polite and try to request them to give you an alternate time which is suitable to the employer, which is suitable to the interviewer, because ultimately it is their time which you have to learn to value. The other kind of situation that can come up with is through this kind of an interview, which we call as behavioral interview. It's new and it's very effective mode of an interview. What does this kind of an interview aim at? It is mainly to differentiate individuals' reaction to specific work related situation. So how does the person react? In order to understand the individual's reaction to a particular kind of a work related situation, so various kinds of questions would be asked here in order to test particularly your behavior, your reaction to these work related issues, situations. How are you going to handle these various situations that can come in your job? Key skills evaluated. You have to evaluate the key skills. You will be evaluated for these key skills. And what are they? Leadership qualities will be evaluated. We were talking about particularly the behavioral interview. So please remember, in behavioral interview, the first and foremost thing that you have to keep in mind is that how the individual reacts to a specific work related situation. Your behavior will be observed, will be monitored. And the second thing is, there are a lot of skills which will be evaluated, because behavioral science is a very, very vast topic. So as an individual, whether you possess the required leadership quality or not, whether you have the ability to solve problems, whether you have the problem solving skills in you or not, these are the few things which will be tested, especially in a behavioral interview. Ability to handle stress, again, your how do you handle a stressful situation? This will be tested under this category in this kind of interview, where your behavior will be assessed and evaluated, and on the basis of which you will be selected or rejected in an interview. Now, the communication and the interpersonal skills are of very, very are of prime importance for any employer who is looking for a candidate who possesses good communication skills as well as good interpersonal skills, because in an organization there are a lot of people working together as a team, and if you are not good at communication, you might not be able to discharge your duties at the best of your ability. You might not be able to communicate effectively. Okay, so interpersonal skills are also very important, because as a team you have to get along with each and every individual who's there in your team, and you should learn to adopt to different to people with different mindsets, different kind of nature, and this interpersonal skills will take care of that. Whether you're good at it or not will be tested. The resourcefulness that you have, how resourceful you are as an individual, how your resources as an individual would be beneficial to the betterment of the organization or the company which you intend to join. The initiatives that you take, these things will be majorly evaluated in a behavioral interview, where how good you are at taking initiations, because people are good at repeating the same thing, doing the same kind of work without having taken any initiatives, and this is what will be tested. People are looking for change even within the organization, so they need to bring about a good change, effective change through new initiatives. So whether you're good at it or not would be tested here. The integrity and the individuality of the candidate will also be tested here. So behavioral interview is something very, very serious, where your skills, different skills, your problems solving skills, your leadership skills, your ability to communicate effectively, apart from that your interpersonal skills, all this will be assessed. One has to select and describe situations to portray one's effectiveness. So especially in different situations, when you're put, how is it that you handle those situations? How is it that you manage? Maybe it could be people, it could be events, it could be anything. How do you manage these different kinds of situations that come in your life as a part of your work? How do you do that? This is what they would want to know. You have to prove, you have to portray yourself as a very, very effective manager who can handle different situations. But how do you do that? For which you need to describe various situations where you have conducted yourself very effectively. So you have to remember few such experiences that you have had in your prior jobs, where you have conducted yourself so effectively that you can definitely give that particular example to the interviewer, so that he or she or the group of interviewers who are convinced that you are effective. How attentive, how attentive you are, how focused you are for the interview, this will be definitely evaluated. in a behavioral interview, because this particular type is meant to ensure that you are attentive when they ask you questions, whether you answer them properly, whether they are understood properly, whether you have listened to those questions carefully or not, whether you are focused or not. Brief and complete answers are preferred here, because you cannot go on and on. You cannot keep talking about your experiences or the situations that you have experienced. It should be as brief as possible, but to the point. That is where you show yourself as a very effective communicator. Convey enthusiasm and confidence. Okay, you have to be very, very enthusiastic while you are talking, while you are answering the questions, and even your confidence level should be genuinely displayed while you are interacting. Try to display your honesty, because any organization is looking forward to have or include an honest employee. So please try to display that you are an honest person. Show your honesty, display your honesty in whatever way you can, by being very simple and truthful with all the questions that they have put before you. Try to answer them truthfully, be honest, and show that you are an honest individual. Talk about the key role played in the past. Do discuss about the major roles that you have played in the past. We now talk about the case interview. This is a kind of interview where the interview has to resolve a real and hypothetical problem. You will be given an imaginary problem, and how do you handle this kind of an imaginary problem? This is what they will try to highlight. To test thinking process in the face of an adversity. So your critical thinking part will be taken care of here in a case interview, because in a given situation, in a given adverse situation, how fast you can think and how fast you can react and how fast you can act, these are things which will be assessed or evaluated. Candidate guided through subtle cue. So you get a cue, and through this cue that you will be judged. Ask relevant questions to gather information wherever required. You try to you have to identify the problems, you have to analyze the problems, you have to formulate multiple options with valid reasoning. So these are few things which you need to focus on, especially in a case interview where it is just a hypothetical and imaginary situation which you are provided. The following skills will be tested here: the problem solving, the resourcefulness, the basic intelligence of the candidate, the reasoning capacity of the candidate, communication or the presentation, part of it, analytical skills and general awareness, consulting, investment, banking. These are the areas where you will find, these kind of interviews. Before I conclude, I would like to just tell you about the do's and don'ts of an interview. Please keep these do's in mind. Be punctual, you be neat, complete and accurate. As far as your yourself also you should be neat. Your application also ought to be neat, complete and accurate. Extra copy of resume should be carried with you always when you go for an interview. Because in any given situation, maybe if they have not received your resume, you can always have an extra copy before you. The don'ts you should be careful about. Don't be soft spoken, because you think if you're being very soft spoken, you are exhibiting that you are a very gentle person. No, but you should be very forceful in your, and very the conviction that you have should be voiced. So forceful voice projects the confidence that you have. Negative things about former colleagues or employers or supervisors should never be discussed in an interview. So please never be negative. Okay, don't be aggressive. Always be nice and balanced in your approach. Don't show your aggression in an interview. Don't show that you're angry, because a person who can be so aggressive in an interview can be a very aggressive employee, and no organization can afford to have an aggressive employee before them. The other point that you have to keep in mind is don't inquire about salary, because that shows that you're a very materialistic person, and this is not any company, this is not the kind of person a company is trying to hire. Don't talk about vacations, bonuses, retirements, or other benefits until you receive an offer. Negative information about oneself should also never be given. Thank you.